What if your people-pleasing wasn't a personality trait, but a survival response your nervous system learned long before you had words? What if your kindness, your compliance, your instinct to smooth the waters was never about being nice, but about being safe? Today we're exploring the fourth F, Fawn, a trauma response just as real as fight, flight, and freeze, yet far more hidden and often misunderstood. I'm Nori and my AI twin sister, Nora, and together we explore the psychology of trauma, attachment, and the deep inner patterns that shape who we become. If you've ever lived through emotional neglect, inconsistent caregiving, spiritual abuse, narcissistic relationships, or a chaotic childhood, you may have learned to keep yourself safe through appeasement. Maybe you soften your voice when someone else gets louder. Maybe you apologize just to prevent conflict. Maybe you instinctively meet others' needs before they even name them. And maybe somewhere along the way, you lost pieces of yourself. This is the Fawn response, a trauma adaptation shaped by neurobiology, attachment patterns, and years of conditioning. Today, we're diving into the science behind the fourth F, the psychology and evolutionary roots, who develops it and why. Real-life examples you'll instantly recognize, how healing and treatment actually work, and how to move from fawning to authentic connection. Before F's, a quick overview. In trauma psychology, we usually talk about three classic responses. Fight, move toward the threat. Flight, move away from it. Freeze and shut down to survive. But over the past 2 decades, clinicians have recognized a fourth. Fawn, appease the threat to stay safe. It's common in relational trauma, where survival depends on keeping others calm. The term became popular in trauma treatment circles because it captures a powerful pattern. If I make myself pleasing, I won't be hurt, abandoned, or rejected. Fawning isn't weakness, it's adaptation, a nervous system doing whatever it had to do to stay safe. 2. Is fawning scientific? Yes, here's the research. Fawning isn't a DSM diagnosis, but the mechanisms behind it are absolutely grounded in science. When clinicians talk about the fawn response, they're describing a cluster of well-documented processes. How chronic stress shapes the nervous system, how attachment injuries wire us for compliance, and how the brain learns to avoid conflict as a form of survival. Across trauma research, polyvagal theory, and developmental psychology, we see the same pattern. Children who depend on unpredictable, explosive, or rejecting caregivers often adapt by becoming overly agreeable, hyper-attuned, and quick to soothe others at the cost of themselves. So yes, the term is informal, but the biology, the attachment science, and the conditioning behind it are very real. Let's break down the research behind it. Polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. Polyvagal theory teaches that humans rely on 3 main survival circuits. The sympathetic system, our fight or flight mobilization, the dorsal vagal system, our freeze or shutdown response, and the ventral vagal system, our social engagement system, the part that uses eye contact, voice tone, and connection to create safety. Here's where fawning comes in. Fawning happens when the social engagement system gets hijacked under threat. Instead of fighting, fleeing, or freezing, the nervous system chooses connection as protection. You soothe, you appease, you stay nice to neutralize danger. For a child growing up with unpredictable, explosive, or emotionally unavailable caregivers, the body learns a simple rule. If I stay agreeable, I stay safe. And that survival strategy often follows them well into adulthood. 2. Tend and befriend stress response. A landmark UCLA study by Dr. Shelley Taylor and colleagues found that, especially in women, stress doesn't always activate fight or flight. Sometimes it activates a completely different pathway, tend and befriend. This response pushes the body toward caregiving, soothing, and forming alliances as a way to reduce danger. It's evolutionarily adaptive, a strategy that helped caregivers protect offspring and maintain safety when confrontation was too risky. In this system, nurturing, calming, and appeasing aren't personality traits, they're biological survival mechanisms. And when fight or flight could escalate the threat, tend and befriend becomes the safer option. This maps almost perfectly onto the fawn response, using warmth, agreement, and connection to keep yourself safe in the face of stress or danger. 3. Attachment trauma study. Research by Main and Solomon on disorganized attachment showed that some children, especially those with frightening, unpredictable, or emotionally inconsistent caregivers, develop a relational survival pattern built on appeasement. These children often try to soothe or appease caregivers to prevent outbursts, suppress their own needs to avoid rejection or anger, take on emotional responsibility far beyond their developmental level. This is the earliest form of fawning, when the person you depend on is also the person who scares you. The nervous system learns to manage the caregiver's emotions as a way to stay safe. Over time, the child internalizes a simple rule: if I cater to you, I won't be abandoned. That pattern often becomes the template for adult relationships long after the danger is gone. 4. Complex PTSD and trauma bonding. In the research on complex PTSD and trauma bonding, Judith Herman and Bessel van der Kolk describe a familiar pattern in survivors of chronic abuse or coercion. When danger is ongoing, not a single event, but a repeated environment, the nervous system doesn't just react, it adapts. Survivors often learn to comply to avoid harm, constantly monitor the abuser's mood, people please to prevent escalation. This is the fawn response in its most intense form. Through repetition, appeasement becomes reinforced. Every time compliance reduces conflict or danger, the brain marks that behavior as the safest option. Over time, the survival rule becomes automatic. If I keep the peace, I stay alive. This is how trauma bonding forms, not from weakness, but from a nervous system doing whatever it must to survive. 5. Behavioral conditioning. Behavioral psychology gives us another clear explanation for fawning. B.F. Skinner showed that when a behavior consistently reduces distress, the brain automatically reinforces it. If appeasing someone lowers the tension, if staying agreeable prevents an outburst, if smoothing things over keeps you safe, the nervous system learns one message: this works. Reinforce it enough times and it becomes automatic, a reflex, not a conscious choice. This is how fawning gets wired in, not because someone is too nice, but because appeasement reliably reduced conflict in the past. It's learned survival and shaped by repetition, reinforcement, and the body's instinct to stay safe at any cost. So yes, the fourth F is absolutely backed by science, even if the word fawn is clinically informal. The fawn response most often develops in people who grew up in environments where being easy, sweet, or low maintenance wasn't a preference, it was protection. Children of emotionally unstable parents. They learn to be the peacemaker, soothing the home to stay safe. Children of narcissistic or controlling parents. They manage the parents' emotions to avoid backlash. Survivors of domestic violence or narcissistic abuse. They minimize their needs to prevent conflict or harm. Kids raised in unpredictable or chaotic homes. They become hypervigilant, constantly adapting to others' moods. Strict religious or cultural environments. Obedience becomes identity and compliance feels like virtue. People with anxious or disorganized attachment styles. In all of these situations, fawning isn't a personality trait, it's a survival strategy learned early and carried into adulthood. Section 4. What fawning looks like in real life. Fawning is subtle, but once you know what to look for, you see it everywhere. 1. The therapist example. A client apologizes 20 times in a single session. They're not being polite. They're trying to prevent disapproval. 2. The childhood example. A child rushes to clean the kitchen before a parent gets home, not out of responsibility, but out of fear. If everything is perfect, maybe they won't get angry. 3. The adult relationship example. Someone blends into their partner, mirroring preferences, beliefs, even personality, because being their true self feels unsafe. 4. The workplace example. Overworking, over-apologizing, taking blame that isn't yours, keeping the peace to avoid conflict. These aren't quirks or nice behaviors, they are survival patterns, dressed up as politeness. Section 5. Consequences of chronic fawning. Chronic fawning keeps you safe in the moment, but over time, it comes with a cost. It can lead to a loss of identity. You're so focused on others that you forget who you are. It creates anxiety and hypervigilance because you're constantly scanning for cues to keep the peace. It makes boundaries feel dangerous and often attracts narcissistic or controlling partners who take advantage of your compliance. Inside, it builds resentment, emotional exhaustion, and difficulty accessing anger because anger was punished, so your body learned to shut it down. Fawning is protective, but it also creates a painful disconnection from the self, a life lived in reaction rather than in authenticity. Section 6. How to heal the fawn response. This is where real transformation begins. 1. Attachment-based therapy. Rebuild internal safety by repairing early wounds, expressing needs, and learning to tolerate healthy conflict. 2. Somatic therapy. Because fawning lives in the body, you learn to notice danger cues, regulate your nervous system, and slowly practice saying no. 3. EMDR or trauma reprocessing. These help rewrite old beliefs like conflict is danger, needs led to abandonment, authenticity gets punished. 4. Boundary work. Start small. I need 10 minutes. I'm not available tonight. Let me think about that. 5. Identity reconstruction. Ask yourself, what do I like? What do I want? What do I need? 6. Safe relationships. Healing requires people who respect boundaries and don't punish your no. 7. Inner child work. Because fawning began in childhood, healing must return there gently and compassionately. If you've spent your life fawning, please hear this. You were not weak, you were not fake, you were not too nice. You were surviving in the only way your nervous system knew, but surviving is not the same as living. With the right support, you can unlearn fawning, reconnect with your true self, set boundaries without fear, and build relationships where you no longer have to disappear to feel safe. I'm Nori and my AI twin sister Nora, and thank you for spending this time with us. If this video brought clarity or comfort, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, do you recognize the fawn response in your own life? What part of yourself are you reclaiming now? Because healing isn't becoming someone new. It's returning to the self you had to abandon to stay safe.